wind carried the scent of damp soil and burning wood, a strange mix of life and decay. Somewhere beyond the forest line, a church bell rang slow and hollow, like a dying heartbeat. I remember the sound because it marked the day everything changed, the day I truly understood what it meant to survive in the Middle Ages. It was early spring, though the chill of winter still haunted the valley. The ground was soft with thawed mud, and the river that once froze solid now ran black and fast, eating away at its banks. I had been walking since dawn, my boots soaked, the thin wool of my cloak no match for the cold mist that rolled through the trees. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, but I'd long stopped caring about the pain. Pain was a companion constant, familiar, almost comforting. It reminded me that I was still alive. The village I'd left behind was a smear of smoke by now. The plague had taken most of them, black boils, bleeding eyes, fevered screams echoing through thin walls. I hadn't waited for the priests to burn the houses. I'd left before the first torch touched thatched roof. Some said leaving was cowardice. Others said it was the only smart thing left to do. I didn't know which I was anymore, but I knew I couldn't stay. The smell of death clung to everything, even the prayers. The forest offered no mercy either. Food was scarce. The animals had fled months ago when the snow came heavy and endless. I found a dead deer, once its ribs torn open by wolves. I took the scraps the beasts left behind. My hands shook as I ate the raw meat, but my body was too weak to argue. I remember the taste, metallic, bitter, but it kept me breathing another day. Nights were the worst. The cold was a living thing, crawling into my bones, whispering sleep. But sleep meant death. The sound of branches cracking somewhere in the dark, the distant howls, or sometimes the silence itself had made me believe that the forest watched, that something old and unseen lived there, waiting for those who gave in. I kept the fire small, afraid of drawing attention, afraid of wasting wood. My fingers blistered from striking flint. Every spark felt like a battle won. Once I came across a group of travelers by the river, 3 men and a boy, maybe 12. They had a horse with them, skin stretched tight over its ribs. We didn't speak much. In those days, words could get you killed. One man coughed blood as we shared the fire. The others didn't look at him. We all pretended not to see. The next morning, he was gone. No one mentioned him. The boy kept his eyes low, his face gray with fear. I didn't stay long after that. Trust was a luxury no one could afford. Days blurred into nights. My hands cracked open from the cold. My lips bled. I learned to catch rats and roast them over coals. I learned to chew bark to keep my stomach from twisting. Once, I found a patch of frozen berries. I ate too many and vomited until my throat burned. But still, I counted that day a victory. Survival was never about strength. It was about enduring the filth, the hunger, the loneliness, and still waking up the next morning. There were times I thought about ending it. A blade across the wrist, a step into the river, letting the current take me. But every time I stood on the edge, something inside whispered no. Not faith, not hope, just stubbornness. The kind that keeps a dying fire alive through a storm. After nearly 2 weeks alone, I stumbled upon a ruined monastery. Its stone walls were cracked, moss creeping through the mortar, but it stood defiant against time. I pushed through the broken gates and found shelter in what used to be the chapel. The altar was smashed, the cross half burned. I remember sitting there, my breath echoing in the hollow space, thinking of how even God seemed to have abandoned this place. I found a few relics: an old wooden bowl, a tattered blanket, a rusted lantern. In the corner, a skeleton lay curled like a sleeping child, a rosary still clutched in its bony hand. I didn't pray. I took the blanket instead. Survival demanded choices. Mercy was a luxury for the living. For 3 nights, I stayed there. It was the first time I felt almost safe. I scavenged what I could from the fallen rooms: bits of grain, moldy bread, even a jug of stale wine. It burned my throat, but it warmed my chest. Outside, the rain fell hard, beating against the roof like 1,000 drums. I thought maybe I could stay, maybe rebuild something. But safety never lasted in those days. On the 4th morning, I heard voices outside, low horsemen's voices. I peeked through a crack in the wall. 3 figures, wrapped in torn leather and fur, carrying spears. Bandits, or worse. They were picking through the rubble, searching for anything worth taking. My heart pounded so loud I feared they would hear it. I clutched a rock in my hand, ready to strike if they came close. But Liqueur, whatever remained of it, was on my side. They moved on, laughing, one of them kicking at a skull, before disappearing into the trees. I didn't breathe until they were gone. That day I realized something vital. In the Middle Ages, survival wasn't about living, it was about not dying. Every breath was borrowed time. Every meal stolen from fate. The plague, the cold, the hunger, none of it cared about right or wrong. You either endured, or you vanished like smoke. When I finally left the monastery, I took the rosary from the dead monk's hand. I don't know why. Maybe as a reminder that once, someone prayed here, and maybe it meant something. I tied it around my wrist and walked north. I didn't have a destination, only the need to keep moving. The sky hung low and gray, the world silent, except for the crunch of frost beneath my boots. Somewhere in that endless silence, I began to forget who I was before all this. Names, faces, even the sound of laughter, all blurred, replaced by the rhythm of survival. Eat, walk, sleep, repeat. That was life. That was the truth of the Middle Ages. No glory, no heroism, just the brutal beauty of endurance. As the sun sank behind the black line of trees, I stopped by the river again. The water looked like molten steel under the dying light. I knelt, cupped it in my hands, and drank. It tasted of iron and mud. I looked at my reflection, halo eyes, cracked lips, a stranger staring back. That was the first time I realized survival changes you, not just your body, but your soul. You stop fearing death because you start forgetting what life once felt like that night. As I made my small fire and listened to the distant cries of wolves, I whispered to the dark, "Tomorrow, I'll keep walking." Because that's what survival was, not a choice, not courage, just the refusal to stop moving. The snow came early that year, thick, silent flakes falling from a colorless sky, blanketing the earth in a kind of quiet death. Each step I took sank deep into the frozen crust, the cold biting through the thin leather of my boots. My breath came out in clouds, and I could no longer feel my fingers. The forest, once green and alive, now stood like a graveyard of black spears rising from a sea of white. Every sound, the creak of ice, the whisper of wind, felt like a warning. I hadn't seen another soul in nearly a month. No travelers, no villages, not even the distant bark of a dog. The roads had vanished under snow, the river frozen solid. I followed it anyway, tracing its winding path north, guided by instinct more than sense. Food was running out. The last of my bread had gone moldy, and the jerky I'd saved had turned so hard it could break teeth. I chewed it anyway, like leather, just to keep my jaw moving. Hunger does strange things to the mind. It makes time stretch and twist. Days felt like weeks, and nights like years. Once, I came across a small cottage, half buried beneath snow. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, and the door hung open, creaking softly in the wind. I hesitated before entering. In those days, abandoned places rarely meant safety. They meant something or someone had died there. But the cold pushed me forward. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the smell of rot. A single chair lay overturned near the hearth, ashes frozen in the fire pit. On the bed, two shapes huddled beneath a blanket. I pulled it back slowly. A man and a woman's skin drawn tight over bone, eyes sunken, hands clasped together even in death. Their bodies were stiff, their mouths open as if caught mid. Between them lay a small wooden carving of a child's face, worn smooth by touch. I stood there for a long time, staring at them. I wanted to close their eyes, say something, but the words wouldn't come. Survival teaches you to stop mourning. The moment you start feeling sorry, you stop moving in. When you stop moving, you die. I took what I could. A rusted knife, a few scraps of cloth, half a candle. I left the carving where it was. Some things didn't belong to the living anymore. Outside, the snow fell heavier. The wind carried the faint sound of wolves howling somewhere in the distance. I kept walking, head down, the weight of silence pressing on me. Hours passed. Maybe Dazai lost track. My body moved on its own, a hollow machine driven by hunger and fear. One evening, as the sky turned the color of dying embers, I spotted smoke rising between the trees. I thought it was a trick of the light at first, but then I smelled it wood smoke, and something else. Meat. My stomach twisted violently. I followed it. Through the thinning forest, I found a small camp. 2 men sat by a fire, their faces gaunt, their clothes ragged. They looked like survivors like me. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, then stepped forward slowly. Hands raised, they turned immediately, eyes sharp, hands on their blades. I spoke before they could. Peace, I'm alone. One of them, the older man, studied me. His beard was crusted with frost, his eyes hollow but alert. The other man said nothing, just stared. After a long pause, the older one nodded toward the fire. Come then. Don't stand there freezing. I joined them. The fire's warmth was almost painful after so long in the cold. I could smell the stew boiling in a blackened pata, rich, oily scent that made my stomach growl. The older man smiled faintly. You've been out here a while. Too long, I said. He stirred the pots slowly. We all have. We ate in silence. The meat was tough, salty, but I didn't care. It was food. Real food. I could feel life crawling back into my limbs. When I looked up, both men were watching me closely. I tried to ignore it, but something in their eyes made my chest tighten, a kind of hunger that wasn't for food. Later, when darkness fell and the fire burned low, I pretended to sleep. They whispered quietly, voices low but sharp. I caught fragments. Strong enough. Wait till morning. Less struggle. My pulse quickened. My hand found the knife hidden under my cloak. Before dawn, I slipped away. I didn't run. I moved slow, careful, each step measured. Behind me, the campfire still glowed faintly, like a dying star. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see their faces if they woke. I walked until my legs gave out, collapsing beneath a pine tree. My heart hammered in my chest, the knife still clenched in my frozen hand. That was the moment I understood another truth about the Middle Ages. It wasn't the cold or hunger that killed most people. It was desperation. When the world takes everything from you, when you've watched your children starve, and your home turn to ash, what's left to lose? Mercy, kindness. Those words had no place anymore. Only survival mattered, and survival demanded cruelty. When I woke, the sun was bright against the snow. My clothes were stiff with frost, but I was alive. I forced myself up, legs trembling, and kept walking. The river had curved east now, leading toward the hills. I followed it, though I didn't know why. Maybe I hoped to find another village, maybe just an end to the walking by evening. I reached a stone bridge, half collapsed over the frozen river. Beyond it lay the remnants of another settlement, small cottages. A church steeple broken in half, and the faint outline of smoke rising from one chimney. Someone was alive there. I hesitated at the edge of the bridge, fear gnawing at me. Every time I'd found people lately, it had ended in death or betrayal. Still, the pull of warmth was stronger than my caution. I crossed carefully, boots slipping on the ice, and approached the village. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No dogs barking, no voices, no laughter, just the faint crackle of fire. The doors of most houses were boarded shut. I knocked on one. No answer. Another. Still nothing. Then, from the far end of the path, a woman appeared. She was thin, her hair gray, her face lined but not cruel. She carried a bucket of water and stopped when she saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "You shouldn't be here." The sickness came back. My stomach sank. "How many?" "Too many," she said. "The few of us left keep to ourselves. We burn the dead each night." I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Behind her, smoke rose from a pit near the edge of the woods. The smell hit me, then sweet and sharp, the smell of burning flesh. I wanted to turn away, but she said, "If you're strong enough, you can stay till morning. There's room in the barn." I nodded. I didn't have the strength to argue. That night, I lay among the hay, listening to the distant crackle of flames and the quiet weeping that followed. The air was thick with sorrow. I thought of the man and woman in the frozen cottage, of the bandits, of the plague, of everything this world had taken. And yet, I was still alive, somehow, against all odds, still breathing, in the Middle Ages. That was the only victory that mattered. The fire pit still glowed in the distance when morning came, thin trails of smoke winding into the colorless sky. I hadn't slept much. The barn was cold, the air heavy with the smell of hay and rot. Rats rustled in the shadows, and each sound made me flinch awake, my knife clutched tight beneath the blanket. When the first light filtered through the cracks in the wood, I rose. My breath hung in the air like ghosts. Outside, the woman from last night was already at work. She moved slow, deliberate, dragging a wheelbarrow piled with rough cloth sacks toward the edge of the village. I knew what was in them before she spoke. Death had a weight you could feel, even from a distance. "You can help, if you've strength," she said, not looking up. I wanted to refuse, but something in her voice, tired, hollow, resigned, made me follow. The ground was frozen, the snow tinged gray with ash. Together, we lifted the sacks onto the pyre, limbs bent at wrong angles beneath the fabric. The woman struck a spark, and the fire roared to life. The stench hit hard, thick and bitter. I tried not to breathe, but it seeped into everything, my hair, my clothes, my memory. When the flames died, she sat on a rock and stared into the smoke. "My husband built this village," she said, 40 years ago. "There were 30 families once. Children, everywhere. Now it's just me and 2 others. Maybe for another week." Her words hung in the cold air like frost. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Later, she took me to her cottage. Inside, it was small but neat. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a single loaf of coarse bread rested on the table. She tore it in half and handed me a piece. It was hard as stone, but warm. I hadn't tasted bread in weeks. "You're not from here," she said. "No," I replied. "I've been walking north." She frowned. "There's nothing north anymore. The plague took the cities. The lords fled to their keeps. Even the priests stopped coming." I didn't tell her that I already knew. The road north was littered with the remnants of faith and power, broken wagons, bones, and silence. Still, I couldn't stop moving. "I'll keep going," I said. She studied me for a moment. "Then take this." From a shelf, she pulled down a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were strips of dried meat, a flint, and a small wooden cross. "For luck," she said. I wanted to thank her, but the words caught in my throat. She smiled faintly, the first sign of warmth I'd seen in months. "Survive," she said simply. "That's all there is left to do." By noon, I was on the road again. The village disappeared behind me, swallowed by the white horizon. I didn't look back. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint echo of that woman's words. Survive. That was the only prayer anyone still believed in. For 2 days, I followed the frozen river. The hills grew steeper, the air thinner. My body ached from hunger, my lips cracked and bleeding. I'd started talking to myself, whispering nonsense just to hear a voice. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, there was only wind. The silence of winter plays tricks on the mind. It makes you see shapes in the snow, faces in the fog. On the third night, I found shelter beneath a collapsed watchtower. The stones were cold, but they blocked the wind. I built a small fire and gnawed on a strip of the woman's dried meat. It tasted of smoke and salt better than anything I'd had in weeks. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound, faint, slow, a dragging noise just beyond the firelight. I froze. The flames had burned low, shadows flickering across the stone walls. My knife was in my hand before I realized I'd moved. Then I saw it, a shape, crawling through the snow toward the entrance. For a moment, I thought it was an animal, but when it moved closer, the firelight caught a face, pale, human, a man, half frozen, his lips blue, his eyes glassy but alive. "Help," he rasped. "Please." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to stay away, but something, maybe pity, maybe madness, made me drag him inside. His clothes were soaked, his hands trembling violently. I wrapped him in my cloak and gave him a sip of water. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking. "They left me, took everything, said I was cursed." "Who?" I asked. He shuddered. "Bandits. I traveled with them after the sickness took my family. I thought they'd keep me safe." He coughed, blood spattering the snow. "They said I was sick. They were right. Maybe." I stepped back. His skin was gray, veins blackened beneath the surface. I'd seen it before. The plague. He looked up at me, eyes wide with desperation. "Don't leave me," he begged. The fire cracked. My mind spun. Every part of me wanted to run, to escape the contagion, the death I'd been running from for months. But the man's voice broke something in me. I had been alone too long, so I stayed. Through the night, he raved half dreams, half memories. He spoke of burning villages, of soldiers turning on each other, of priests throwing themselves into rivers when prayers failed. His voice grew weaker with every hour. By dawn, he stopped breathing. I sat beside him, staring at the body. The air was still, the fire cold. I should have burned him. I knew that, but I didn't have the strength. I dragged him outside and covered him with snow instead. A grave without words, a death without witness. That day, I couldn't move on. My legs felt heavy, my chest hollow. I sat beneath the tower until the sun began to fall, thinking of how death followed me like a shadow. It wasn't just the sickness. It was the world itself rotting from the inside. I thought about the stories people used to tell, of knights and kings, of holy wars and divine miracles. But none of that mattered here. In the real Middle Ages, there were no heroes, just people like me, clinging to life by fingernails, praying for a morning that might never come. When I finally stood, I felt something new, not hope, but defiance. The plague could take everyone, the cold could strip the world bare, but I would keep walking, not because I believed in anything, but because the act of moving forward was all that separated the living from the dead. That night, as I walked beneath a sky full of frozen stars, I whispered to the dark, "If death wants me, it'll have to catch me." And in that silence, I swore I heard the wind answer back. The storm came without warning. One moment the world was silent, the next it was screaming. Snow fell in thick sheets, driven sideways by wind so fierce it cut through flesh like knives. I had barely reached the edge of the northern woods when the first gust hit, knocking me to my knees. The trees swayed violently, their branches groaning like old bones. My cloak whipped around me, the fabric stiff with frost. I tried to keep moving, but the path disappeared under a white blur. Every direction looked the same, endless, merciless, cold. By the second hour, my vision had begun to fade. The wind howled in my ears, drowning out everything else. I stumbled forward, half blind, until I saw a shape rising out of the snow, a building, or what was left of one. A stone tower, its roof caved in, standing alone in the storm, like a monument to forgotten lives. I pushed the heavy door open and fell inside. The air was damp, thick with the scent of mold and wet wood. My body shook uncontrollably, my hands numb and blue. I dropped to the floor and just lay there, listening to my own heartbeat, faint and uneven. It took a long time before I found the strength to move. There were remnants of life inside: broken furniture, a rusted cauldron, a handful of rotted blankets. Someone had lived here once, long ago. I gathered what I could, started a small fire using splinters from the furniture, and huddled close to it. The flames licked at my skin, painful and comforting. Outside, the storm screamed. Inside, it was silence and smoke. For 3 days, the blizzard raged. I rationed what little food I had left, drinking melted snow from a cracked bowl. My fingers began to turn black at the tips, frostbite. I wrapped them in cloth, whispering curses through chattering teeth. Sleep came in flashes, dreams of warmth, of laughter, of the world before. Every time I woke, the fire had burned low, and the walls seemed closer. On the 4th morning, the wind finally eased. The silence that followed was almost worse. It was too still, too empty. I stepped outside. The world had changed. No more trees, no path, just an ocean of white stretching into the distance. The storm had erased everything. I started walking again. I didn't know where I was going. My legs felt like stone. My lungs burned with every breath. The sun hung low behind a veil of cloud, offering no warmth, only light. Hours passed, maybe days. I stopped counting. It was near dusk when I saw movement ahead, a flicker of orange, faint but real. Firelight. My heart stuttered. I moved faster, stumbling through the snow until I reached a small clearing. There, half buried in ice, stood a wooden cabin. Smoke rose from its chimney. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to be careful. Still, the sight of firelight was too much to ignore. I approached slowly and knocked. The door opened just enough for me to see a man's face, gaunt, sharp eyes, dark and watchful. He said nothing, just looked at me. Finally, he stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." Inside, it was warm, blessedly warm. A fire roared in the hearth, and the smell of stew filled the air. My stomach twisted with hunger. I nodded my thanks and sat near the fire, holding my hands over the flames. The man watched me closely. "You're lucky," he said after a while. "Another hour out there, and you'd be dead." "Seems that's been true for months," I replied. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You're not wrong." The cabin was small, but well kept. Shelves lined with jars. Tools hung neatly on the walls. I hadn't seen such order in a long time. It felt strange, almost dangerous. He poured me a bowl of stew. I hesitated for only a moment before eating. It was rich, thick, and hot meat, carrots, and something else I couldn't place. The warmth spread through me like a miracle. "You live here alone?" I asked. He nodded. "Had a wife once. She's gone now." I didn't ask how. In those days, there were only a few ways to go, and none of them gentle. Night fell. The wind picked up again, rattling the windows. I offered to take watch, but he waved me off. "You rest. You need it." And I did. I slept heavier than I had in months. When I woke, it was dark. The fire was still burning, but something felt wrong. The man sat across the room, staring at me. His eyes were too still, too calm. I sat up slowly. "You sleep quietly," he said. "Most don't." I didn't answer. My gaze drifted to the pot by the fire. The smell that had once comforted me now seemed too thick, too sweet. My stomach turned. "What kind of meat is that?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Does it matter?" My chest tightened. I looked at the shelves again. There were no traps, no bows, no sign of hunting. Just jars, dozens of them each, filled with dark red chunks floating in brine. The man followed my gaze and sighed. "Don't look at me like that. You'd have done the same." I stood slowly. "No, I wouldn't." He laughed softly. "Everyone says that, until the hunger starts whispering. You'll see." My hand crept toward my knife. He noticed. "Don't," he said quietly. "You won't make it to the door." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the fire crackling between us, casting long shadows on the walls. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud and wild. Then, without another word, I moved. The knife flashed, quick and desperate. He lunged too, but I was faster. The blade struck deep. His face twisted in shock, then softened. He sank to his knees, blood pooling beneath him. I stumbled back, chest heaving, my mind blank. The smell of iron filled the room. I don't remember much after that. I took his coat, his boots, some food, though I couldn't eat it. I left the cabin before dawn, the fire still burning behind me. Outside, the world was silent again. The snow glittered under the pale moonlight, pure and untouched. I walked until the cabin was just another ghost behind me. That night, as I built a small fire beneath the open sky, I realized I hadn't cried. Not for the man, not for the countless others. I couldn't. The cold had frozen more than my skin it had frozen. Whatever part of me still felt human. In the Middle Ages, survival stripped everything away: morality, kindness, even identity. All that remained was instinct. As the wind whispered across the snow, I whispered back, "I'm still here." It wasn't pride. It wasn't defiance. It was the only truth left in a world that had forgotten how to live. The days that followed blurred together like streaks of gray on a frozen canvas. The sky never changed, always the same dull white that seemed to press down on the world, crushing it beneath its silence. I walked without knowing where I was headed, following the faint outline of a road half buried beneath snow. My legs ached, my hands were raw and cracked, and the wind chewed through every layer of cloth I wore. The memory of the man in the cabin haunted me. His voice, his calmness, the way the firelight had flickered in his eyes just before he fell. But guilt was a luxury. In the Middle Ages, guilt didn't feed you, didn't warm you. It only slowed your steps on. Slowing down meant death. After several days, I found the road led into a valley. The wind died there, and the snow thinned just enough to see the black soil beneath. A river ran through the center, frozen over, but still whispering faintly beneath the ice. Along its banks stood the remnants of another settlement. Broken carts, collapsed huts, bones half buried in frost. I recognized the shape of a mill by the water's edge. Its wheel hung motionless, wrapped in ice like a giant's skeleton. Inside the mill, the air was still and dry. I found a pile of straw in one corner and collapsed into it. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe if such a thing still existed. I built a small fire, careful not to let the smoke rise too high, and sat there listening to the faint creak of ice shifting in the river. That night, I dreamed. In my dream, the world was warm again. I stood in a field of tall grass under a golden sky. There were voices, soft, familiar, laughter. For a moment, I almost believed I was home. But then, the wind turned cold, and the laughter changed, warped into screams. The grass blackened, the sky dimmed, and I saw faces in the dark, hollow-eyed and reaching. I woke with a start, sweat freezing on my skin. The fire had gone out. I stayed in that mill for days. It became my shelter, my fortress, my prison. I scavenged what I could: frozen grain, a cracked pot, an old saw. The river gave me water, though it tasted like rust and stone. But food ran out quickly. as it always did. Hunger returned, a beast gnawing at the inside of my ribs. On the fifth morning, I heard movement outside. I froze, listening. Footsteps soft, deliberate. I grabbed my knife and crept toward the door. Through a gap in the wood, I saw 3 figures moving through the snow. 2 men and a woman. They looked worn but alive, dressed in furs, carrying spears. Travelers, perhaps, or scavengers like me. They stopped near the river, breaking the ice with their weapons. I watched as they pulled something from beneath the surface, a deer carcass, bloated and pale. They cheered weakly, relief flashing across their faces. Food. I stepped out before I could think twice. Wait, I called. They turned sharply. One of the men raised his spear. The woman stared at me, wary, but not hostile. Who are you? She asked. Just a traveler, I said. I've been living in the mill. I mean no harm. The older man lowered his spear slightly. You're alone, I nodded. They exchanged glances. After a long pause, the woman said, Come, share the fire, if you don't steal. We cooked the deer that night by the riverside. The smell of meat made my head spin. It had been so long since I'd eaten anything real. We sat around the flames, our faces glowing in the orange light. The older man, his name was Marek, told me they'd come from the west, fleeing raiders. The younger man was his son, barely 20. The woman Ilsa was not related to them. They had met on the road and stayed together for safety. There's a castle north of here, Marek said between bites, old and half-ruined, but still standing. They say, a lord holds it, still feeding survivors. We're heading there. A castle, a place with walls, food, maybe even warmth. It sounded like a dream. If you'll have me, I'll go with you, I said. Marek nodded. One more blade won't hurt. We left at dawn. The snow glittered under the pale light, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to purpose. The road wound upward through jagged hills, the trees thinning until only rock remained. Each step was a battle against exhaustion. Marek's son stumbled often. The woman carried more than her share without complaint. By the third day, the wind had turned bitter again. We found shelter in a cave carved into the side of a cliff. Inside, the air was warmer, though damp. We built a small fire and huddled close. Marek spoke softly of his home fields of wheat, laughter of children, the bell of the church calling them to supper. His voice cracked as he spoke. The world he described felt like a myth, something that had never truly existed. That night, as we slept, I woke to a sound, breathing ragged, shallow. I turned and saw Marek's son clutching his chest, sweat pouring down his face. His skin was pale, his lips dark. Ilsa leaned over him, panic in her eyes. He's burning up, she whispered. The plague, I knew that look. I'd seen it too many times. Marek knelt beside his boy, helpless. He just needs rest, he said, though his voice trembled. But rest wouldn't help. Nothing would buy morning. The boy was dead. Marek didn't speak. He just sat there, holding the body, rocking back and forth. The silence was unbearable. Finally, Ilsa touched his shoulder. We have to burn him, she said gently. He didn't move. I stepped forward. I'll do it. We carried the body outside and built a pyre of dried branches. The fire crackled, the smoke rising into the gray sky. Marek stood motionless, eyes empty. When it was over, he turned to me. Thank you, he said quietly. But there was something in his gaze, something cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cave felt smaller, tighter. I heard Marek whispering to himself in the dark, words I couldn't make out. Ilsa stared into the fire, her face pale and unreadable. At dawn, Marek was gone. We found his spear missing, footprints leading out into the snow. We followed them for a while, but they vanished near the river. Maybe he went to join his son. Maybe the cold took him. Either way, we didn't speak of it. Ilsa and I continued north, two ghosts walking through the ruins of a dying world. Days passed, then weeks. The castle Merak spoke of became a fading hope, but still we walked. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, I thought I saw movement on the horizon, dark shapes watching from the hills. Wolves, perhaps, or worse. And yet, despite everything, we kept moving. Because that's what survival was. The stubborn refusal to stop. Each step forward was a defiance against the end of the world. And in that endless white silence, I began to realize something terrifying. Survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about becoming something else entirely, something the old world would never have recognized. The wind had shifted again. It blew from the east now, sharp and steady, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke, faint but real. Ilsa and I paused on the ridge, our breath rising in white plumes. For weeks, we had followed nothing but ghosts and silence. The idea that someone, somewhere ahead, was burning wood felt impossible. We looked at each other without speaking. Hope was dangerous. It could warm you, but it could also kill faster than the cold if it turned out to be false. Still, we started walking. The hills gave way to a wide valley, the ground frozen hard beneath our boots. The smell grew stronger as we descended. Somewhere out there, someone was alive. By dusk, we saw it, a wall of stone rising out of the snow, half broken but still standing. Beyond it, the faint flicker of firelight glowed through narrow slits in the masonry. The castle Merak had spoken of, it was real. We reached the gate as night fell. Two figures appeared atop the wall, men in ragged armor, their breath steaming in the cold. One of them shouted down, "Who goes there?" "Travelers," I called back. "We mean no harm. We seek shelter." They muttered to each other before lowering a rope ladder. "If you're lying," one said, "you'll wish you'd stayed in the snow." Inside the walls, the air was thick with smoke and the stench of burned meat. The courtyard was littered with broken carts and barrels. Fires burned in iron pits, and around them a handful of survivors, huddled faces pale, eyes hollow. Soldiers, peasants, maybe thieves. It didn't matter anymore. Hunger made equals of us all. A man approached, broad-shouldered, his beard streaked with gray. His armor was dented, the crest long faded. He looked like someone who'd once been a lord, though the title no longer meant much. "You're lucky," he said. "Most who come here don't make it." Ilsa bowed her head slightly. "We've been walking since the first frost." He studied us. "There's food for those who work, fire for those who fight. You'll earn your place here." We agreed before he even finished. Anything was better than the road. They led us to the great hall, or what was left of it. The roof had collapsed, and snow piled along the walls, but a massive fire blazed in the center. Around it sat 24 people, wrapped in furs and rags. They looked up as we entered, suspicion flickering in their eyes, then turned away. That first night, we ate boiled roots and stale bread. It was more than I'd had in months. My hands shook as I held the bowl. Beside me, Ilsa ate slowly, her face blank, her eyes unfocused. Later, we were shown a small room near the tower steps. Straw on the floor, a single blanket. It felt like luxury. I slept without dreams. Days passed. Life inside the castle had its rhythm. At dawn, we gathered wood and melted snow for water. At dusk, we repaired walls or scouted the nearby woods for food. The lord, his name was Sir Alderdruld, what remained of this place. Once a noble, now simply another survivor trying to hold on to something that resembled order. But there was no order, only fear. At night, I could hear them whispers, cries, sometimes laughter that didn't sound human. The plague had reached the castle long ago. Alderd claimed they'd purged the sick, burned them outside the walls. But sometimes, when the wind was right, I could swear I heard coughing from beyond the fires. One evening, while hauling water, I saw something strange near the northern Geta pit, deep and wide, filled with ash and bones. A soldier stood guard there, staring into it like it might speak. When I asked Ilsa about it, she said quietly, "They say it's where the Lord sends those who try to leave." "Why would anyone want to leave?" I asked. She looked at me, eyes hollow. "Because this isn't living. It's waiting to die." Her words followed me all night. The next morning, Sir Aldred gathered everyone in the courtyard. The wind bit through our clothes as he stood on the steps, his sword gleaming faintly in the gray light. "The stores are empty," he said. "The forest is barren, but we have one last hunt before the snows close us in for good." We left at dawn, 10 of us, armed with spears and bows. The forest beyond the walls was a graveyard of trees, the snow deep and silent. We found nothing all day. No deer, no birds, not even tracks. By nightfall, our fire was small and weak, the cold closing in like a noose. Then we heard it, a sound from the trees, slow, heavy, breathing. We turned, weapons ready. A shadow moved between the trunks, huge and lumbering. For a moment, I thought it was a bear. Then it stepped into the light. It was a man, or what had once been one. His skin was gray, his face half rotted, his eyes empty. He staggered forward, moaning softly. Another figure followed, then another. Within moments, the clearing filled with them, dozens, maybe more. The dead Aldred shouted, "Hold the line." They came fast, faster than I thought possible. We fought with everything we had. Spears shattered, blades broke. The air filled with screams and the wet sound of tearing flesh. I don't remember how long it lasted. When it was over, the snow was red and half our men were gone. We burned the bodies before dawn. The smoke rose black against the pale sky. Aldred stood watching, his expression unreadable. "The sickness walks now," he said quietly. "Even death won't stay buried." We returned to the castle broken and silent. The survivors avoided each other's eyes. Every cough, every shiver became a reason to fear. That night, Ilsa sat beside the fire, staring at her hands. "It's spreading," she whispered. "Soon there'll be no one left." I didn't answer. Outside, the wind howled again, and the flames bent low, as if bowing to something unseen. I realized then that the Middle Ages were not an age of men and kings. They were an age of ghosts. The living and the dead walked side by side, both searching for something they'd already lost. And as I lay there, listening to the fire crackle and the walls creak in the wind, one thought kept echoing through my mind. Survival was no longer about escaping death. It was about learning to live among it. Days turned into weeks inside the stone walls of Aldred's keep, though time itself seemed to lose all meaning. There was no difference between morning and night anymore. The same gray light seeped through the cracks in the walls. The same bitter wind crawled through every hall. The fires burned constantly, not for warmth, but to keep the darkness away. The survivors had grown fewer. Each morning, someone new was missing. Sometimes we found them in their beds, pale and cold. Sometimes they simply vanished, leaving only their footprints leading toward the gate. No one ever followed those tracks. Sir Aldred still held his gatherings in the courtyard. His voice was sharp, commanding, but the fire behind his words was dimming. He spoke of rebuilding, of holding out until spring, but no one believed in spring anymore. One night, a scream shattered the stillness. I ran with others toward the source, the stables. Inside, I saw two men dragging a third one to the ground. His face was red, blistered, eyes wild with fever. "He's sick," someone shouted. "He's infected." The crowd hesitated only a moment before acting. They beat him, then dragged him outside toward the pit. Aldred himself stood by, watching. His expression was unreadable. "Burn him," he said simply. The man's cries echoed against the stone until the fire drowned them out. Afterward, no one spoke. Ilsa stayed away from the others after that. She spent her days near the northern wall, where the stones were cracked and covered in frost. I often joined her, though we said little. Words had lost their power. Silence was easier. One evening, as we sat watching the snow drift against the battlements, she said quietly, "Do you ever wonder if any of this is worth it?" I looked at her. "Surviving?" She nodded. "All the time," I said. "But what else is there to do?" She smiled faintly, though her eyes didn't. "Maybe letting go isn't losing. Maybe it's mercy." I didn't answer. I couldn't. That night, I woke 2 footsteps in the corridor, soft, deliberate. I reached for my knife and crept to the door. Through a crack, I saw Aldred moving down the hall, a torch in one hand, a bundle in the other. He disappeared down the stairs that led to the crypts beneath the keep. Curiosity, or maybe fear, pulled me after him. The air grew colder as I descended. The corridor twisted and narrowed until it opened into a vast chamber lined with tombs. The torchlight flickered across carvings of angels and swords, now eroded and faceless. In the center of the room, Aldred knelt beside a slab of stone. On it lay a body. It was a woman, her skin pale, her hands folded over her chest. She looked untouched by decay, as if only sleeping. A golden ring glimmered on her finger. Aldred was whispering to her. His voice trembled with desperation. "I've done all I can," he said. "I've kept your walls, your people. I've burned the sick, buried the dead, but still they come. Still they die." His shoulders shook. "You said God would watch over us. You lied." The torchlight caught the tears on his face. Then he reached for the woman's hand and I realized her lips were moving. A faint sound escaped them. A sigh, or maybe a word. Aldred gasped, dropping the torch. The flames sputtered, shadows leaping wildly across the walls. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. The air felt wrong, too thick, too heavy. I turned and fled back up the stairs. When I returned to my quarters, Ilsa was gone. At dawn, I found her cloak near the gate, half buried in snow. There were footprints leading into the forest's mall, alone. I followed them for miles, calling her name, but the wind swallowed every sound. Eventually, the tracks disappeared. When I returned, Aldred was waiting by the fire. His eyes were hollow, rimmed in red. "You shouldn't have gone below," he said quietly. I didn't deny it. He looked toward the courtyard, where the fire pits still burned. "The world outside is gone," he said. "But here, in these walls, we can build something new, something pure." There was a strange light in his eyes, half faith, half madness. "You'll help me," he said. "We'll keep order. We'll keep them safe." I wanted to refuse. I wanted to leave, but the gates were frozen shut, and the snow had buried the road. There was nowhere left to go, so I stayed. The days grew darker. Aldred's rules became harsher. Anyone who disobeyed was cast out into the cold or worse. He spoke of divine purpose, of cleansing, of sacrifice, and the people, broken and hungry, obeyed, because fear was easier than hope. One night, he gathered us all in the great hall. The fire roared, shadows twisting on the walls. "We have been chosen," he said, his voice trembling with fervor. "Chosen to endure when the rest of the world rots, but purity demands price." He turned, gesturing toward the doorway. 2 soldiers dragged in a man thin, shivering, his hands bound. I recognized him. Tomas, one of the scouts. "He tried to flee," Aldred said. "He would have brought death to our gates." Tomas pleaded. "Please, there's nothing left out there. Just cold. I only wanted to see the sun." Aldred's expression didn't change. "There is no sun, only God's judgment." He raised his sword. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to scream, but my body wouldn't move. The blade came down. The fire flared bright, then dimmed again. The hall was silent, except for the sound of burning wood. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the walls, staring out at the endless snow. The wind howled like a chorus of the dead. and for the first time, I wondered if we were the last people left in the world or if we were already the dead, trapped in a place that refused to admit it. Somewhere below, in the crypts, I thought I heard movement, a soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing, and a whisper. Not words, exactly just the faint murmur of something ancient and waiting. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I prayed. Not for salvation, not for life, just for the strength to see the next sunrise, if there was one left to see. Final scene. The final winter came without warning. It began as a thin veil of frost one morning, and by nightfall, the world outside the castle was swallowed in a storm so fierce it seemed as if the sky itself wanted to bury everything beneath it. The fires in the courtyard roared day and night, but the cold crept through every crack, every seam, every breath. There were fewer of us now. Half the faces I'd known had vanished, some sent into the storm, others taken by fever or silence. Sir Aldred no longer walked the halls as he once did. He had locked himself away in the tower where the old chapel stood. Sometimes I could hear him through the stone muttering prayers, chanting verses, and sometimes sobbing. I hadn't seen Ilsa since the night she left, but I thought of her often, especially when the wind rose. Sometimes I swore I could hear her voice in its soft, distant, calling my name. On the 5th night of the storm, the great hall roof finally gave way. The sound was like thunder wood snapping, stone grinding, snow pouring in. We worked until dawn, clearing the wreckage, but it was hopeless. The keep was dying. That morning, I went to Aldred's tower. The door was barred, but I forced it open. He was there, kneeling before the altar, his armor gone, his cloak torn and stained. Candles burned around him, their flames weak and trembling. Before him lay the woman I'd seen in the crypt, his wife, or what was left of her. Her eyes were open now, milky and still, her lips cracked and blue. Aldred looked up as I entered. His face was hollow, skin stretched thin over bone. "She spoke to me," he said, voice shaking. "She said, the world must end before it can be made pure again." I stared at him. "You've lost your mind." He smiled faintly. "No, I've found faith." He stood slowly, picking up his sword. "The fire cleanses. It saves. You'll see." Then he turned toward the window and looked out at the storm. "When the dawn comes, I'll set the fires. The castle, the people, all of it, will be free." I felt the weight of his words like stones in my chest. "You'll kill everyone." He looked back at me, his eyes empty. "We're already dead." I ran. The halls echoed with the sound of my footsteps and the roar of wind tearing through broken walls. I shouted for the others, but most were gone. The few who remained were too weak to move, too hollow to care. I found the gate half buried in snow. The hinges were frozen, but I pulled until my hands bled. It groaned open just enough to slip through. The wind hit me like a wall, savage and merciless. Behind me, I heard the bells begin to ring. The old chapel bell, long rusted and silent, now tolled through the storm. 1, 2, 3, and then came the flames. The fire spread fast, leaping from hall to hall, devouring everything it touched. The sky turned orange against the white of the storm. A dying sun over a dying world. I stumbled through the snow, the heat on my back, the cold in my lungs. I didn't look back, not until I reached the edge of the valley. From there, I saw at the castle, once proud and gray, now burning like a beacon in the storm. The flames climbed higher than the walls, and for a moment, it almost looked alive again. I watched until the tower fell, until the last spark vanished into the snow, and then there was silence. I don't know how long I walked after that. Days, maybe weeks. The world blurred into endless white and ash. I found no villages, no people, only the bones of what had once been life. One evening, I came upon a small clearing by the river. The ice there was thin, and beneath it, I could see water still, moving slow, dark, defiant. I built a small fire beside it, though the wood was damp and the smoke thin. I sat there, watching the water, listening to its faint, eternal whisper. And for the first time in months, I spoke out loud, not to anyone, not even to God, but to the world itself. I made it, I said, but I don't know what that means anymore. The wind answered with a low moan, carrying with it the sound of faraway bells. Maybe imagination, maybe memory. I looked into the fire one last time, then closed my eyes. When morning came, the fire was out. The snow had covered the ashes. The river kept moving, slow and patient, as it always had. No one ever found the castle again. No one remembered Sir Aldred, or Ilsa, or the nameless travelers who froze on the road. The world moved on, as it always does, swallowing its ghosts and leaving only silence. And somewhere, beneath that silence, a new dawn waited, in cold and pure. Because in the end, that was the truth of the Middle Ages. Survival was never about conquering death. It was about learning how to vanish quietly into history's snow.